Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's storytelling with me, Kirsty Hartsiotis, and I'm going to be telling you a story tonight that is one of my absolute favourites. It's a story that I learnt when I was a little girl, and it's called The White Cat. And it's by a French writer who wrote this story in the 17th century. Her name was Madame d'Aulnoy, and she wrote a number of folk and fairy tales. This is one that is still told very much today. And I had this as a book when I was a child, with beautiful illustrations, and I really, really loved it. And when I started going to a storytelling club about 20 years ago, I told this. It's the very first story that I ever told. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. There was once a king who enjoyed being king so much that he never wanted to stop. Only problem was, he had 3 strong, strapping sons, all of whom had grown up to be fine young men. And the king, he was sure that those sons of his were plotting against him. He was sure they were going to take the throne from him. He was sure that they were whispering about him behind their backs. And he wasn't sure what to do about it. And so, he thought about it, and after a lot of thinking, he had an idea. And so he called all 3 of his sons to his throne room, and he sat there on his throne, as he liked to do, while his sons bowed to him. And the king, he looked at his 3 sons and he said, "My sons, I am getting old. Soon I will want to retire, and it will be one of you who becomes king after me. Now, I've been king for a long time, and your mother, well, she has been dead for a long time, and I've used all my energy in keeping busy being a king. And when I'm not kinging anymore, I think I'm going to be a bit bored and a bit lonely. And I wondered what I could do to help myself. And then it came to me. I needed a companion, a dog to be precise. But a king should not have any ordinary dog. A king should have the best dog in all the world. A king should have the cleverest dog in all the world. My sons, your task is this. If you wish to become king after me, and it doesn't matter if it's the eldest, it doesn't matter if it's the youngest, it doesn't matter if it's the middle one of you. If you wish to become king after me, you must bring me the cleverest dog in all the world. Now, you have a year and a day to do it, so you better get going." And the king's sons, they bowed once more, and they backed out of the room, and they closed the door behind them. And the eldest son, he turned to the middle son and he said, "Our father's gone mad." "Yes," said the middle son, "he certainly has. But we better go and find this dog, hadn't we? And he got a year and a day to do it." And the youngest son, he said nothing. And the 3 brothers, they went off on their own ways. Now, the eldest son, he wasn't very interested in going off on a quest to find the cleverest dog in the whole world. He had better things to do with his year. He was a busy man. He did a lot of good in the community there in the kingdom. And he thought to himself, I am living in the capital city of the finest country in all the world. Surely this is where one will be able to find the cleverest dog. And so he spoke to his valet, and his valet spoke to this man, and his valet spoke to that man, and this man and that man spoke to another man, and they spoke to some more men, and the story soon came back to the valet that yes, indeed, they were very, very clever dogs, and they were all too happy to bring them to the eldest prince. And a cavalcade of dogs arrived at the eldest prince's door, and he bought all of them. And he built some kennels, and that was him sorted for the rest of the year. He could just go about his business. The second son had a taste for adventure, He went running off to the library and he pulled down his favourite book, the huge World Atlas, and he laid the atlas down on the table and he began to turn page after page after page after page until, yes, there it was, exactly what he'd been looking for. The Isle of Dogs. So he went down to the harbour and he hired a ship and he hired a captain. And the captain hired mariners and they set sail. And it took them 6 long months to reach the Isle of Dogs. When they got there, they saw that it was indeed an island full of dogs. And they did seem pretty clever. They were living there all by themselves. They were clever. And the second son, he was pretty convinced that he would find the cleverest dog in all the world there. And so he sailed away. He bought meat and bones, and he took the meat and bones and he left it as an offering on the Isle of Dogs. And the dogs, they came. Well, they thought it was a good offering. And so some of the dogs, they got on to the boat with the second prince. And for the next 6 months, they spent their time sailing back home with a boatload of dogs. The youngest son, well, he had quite a romantic idea of what a quest should be. And so he took himself a long, stout stick, and he took himself a spotted handkerchief. And inside the handkerchief, he placed a bottle of wine. He placed a loaf of bread and a piece of cheese. And he tied these up in the handkerchief and he slotted the handkerchief onto the stick. And the stick he placed over his shoulder. And off he set, out of the castle, out of the city, across the fields, and to the deep, dark forest, because everybody knows that the place to find adventure is in the forest. Now, the first day was quite nice. It was pleasant weather, warm walking across the fields and then cool in the forest. And at the end of the day, when he had walked and walked and walked and his feet were sore, he sat down underneath a tree. And he ate some bread and he ate some cheese and he drank some wine and he pulled leaves over himself and he slept well. The next morning, when he woke up, it was raining and the leaves were sodden and they stuck to him. And he drank some more of his wine and he ate some more of his bread and he ate the rest of his cheese, and by lunchtime all of that had gone and he was cold and wet and tired, hungry and thirsty. And he thought to himself, this is no kind of adventure. I'm going home. But he couldn't find his way out of the forest. And the day went on and the day went on and it started to get dark and it was still raining. And he began to despair of finding anywhere that he could sleep. But then, just as it was getting dark, he came to a clearing. And there, in the clearing, he saw something strange. It was a house. It was almost a palace. But it was in the shape of a cat. You know what the Sphinx in Egypt looks like, sitting with its paws on the ground, staring out. That is exactly what it looked like. And the steps going up into the palace were the arms and the legs of the cat. And the 2 tall towers, those were the ears of the cat. And the 2 great windows, those were the eyes of the cat. And the great doorway, that was the mouth of the cat. And in the gathering dusk, the youngest prince, he didn't really want to go there, but what choice did he have? It was raining even harder. And so he went up the steps and he knocked on the door. After a while, he heard footsteps and the door opened, and there, standing in front of him, stood a cat. no ordinary cat. This cat was standing on its hind legs, and it was dressed in a servant's livery, a servant's uniform, very richly embroidered and decorated, yes, but a servant nonetheless. And the cat bowed, and the cat ushered him in. And so the youngest prince, he went in, and it was a beautiful palace. But on the walls there were portraits, not of people, but cats. And the chairs, all of the chairs, for feet, they had feet and claws, just like a cat. And he saw other servants, maid servants hurrying by, laundry servants carrying bags of washing. He saw someone hurrying past with a jug and some glasses, and they were all cats. And he was ushered into the presence of a most beautiful cat, a white cat, fluffy, lovely, dressed in exquisite finery. And she smiled at him, and she said, "You are welcome here. Go. A room is being prepared for you. Bathe, change, and come down and eat with us." And that is what he did. He bathed, he put on fine clothes, and he went down to the dining room. And there were dozens of cats in there, and they were all eating raw salmon. But it had been cooked for him, and was served with vegetables. And it was very nice, but didn't really taste it, because he was seated next to the white cat. And they talked. They talked all night. And he found that he had never met anyone, human or cat, who he could talk to in the way that he talked to the cat that night. And he thought to himself, I must get started on my quest tomorrow. But in the morning, he was welcomed back into the company of the white cat, and he talked to her all day, and the next day, and the next week, and the next month, and he forgot all about his quest. And nearly a year had passed when one day he was just looking out of the window, and there he saw, running past, a little dog. My quest! My quest! And he went running into the chamber of the white cat, and he said, white cat, you must help me. I had a year and a day to find the cleverest dog in the whole world. And now I've just got a day left. What can I do? And the white cat, she smiled, and she reached down into the basket beside her, and she pulled out an egg. And she gave the egg to the youngest prince, and she said, take this to your father, place it in his hands, and you shall see what you shall see. And with that, he had to be content. And she provided a carriage for him that was drawn by cats, with cats at the reins. And he set out through the forest, across the fields, through the gate of the palace. And at that point, he decided that it would be best if he went on his own. When he arrived into his father's throne room, he found absolute bedlam. There were dogs everywhere, barking and yipping and yowling and chewing and, well, doing all the things that dogs do, really all the things that dogs do. And it was a bit pongy, and it was loud, and it was mad, and the king was sitting on his throne, and he never wanted to see a dog again. And the two elder princes, they had kind of backed to the back of the room to get out of the way of all of the dogs. But when the king saw his youngest son approaching him without a dog, he was furious. Then the youngest son produced the egg and placed it in his father's hand. And as his father watched, the egg it hatched. And out of the egg there jumped the tiniest dog that you have ever seen. It was no bigger than my thumb. And it began to do tricks, magic tricks. It conjured flowers out of nowhere. It clambered up the king's arm and plucked a coin from behind his ear. It did all sorts of magic. And the last trick was it took off its tiny little hat, and from inside it pulled a rabbit, no bigger than my thumbnail. And the king, he was enchanted. Clearly, this was the cleverest dog in all the world. Only problem was, he was not ready to stop being king. But in the year and a day that he'd had to think about it, he'd come up with another plan. Now, my sons, a dog is all very well for an old king like me, but a king should have a queen. And none of you lads are yet married. You have a year and a day to find yourself a queen. And because a queen should be beautiful, she must be the most beautiful woman in all the world. It was quite old-fashioned, the king. That's what he thought. That's what they had to do. And they bowed and they backed out of the door. The eldest turned to the middle son and he said, "Oh, I tell you, he's completely mad. Still won't retire. I don't know what's got into him. But I suppose if we have to find a bride, that's what we have to do." And the second son, he nodded his head, and off the two of them went, and the youngest son went his own way. Now the eldest son, he knew that there were plenty of pretty girls in the capital, and because it was the capital, he was sure they would be the most lovely in all the world. And one night when he was at the opera, he saw a very beautiful young woman. He sent a message over to her asking her to marry him, and they were married and they lived happily for the rest of that year. He was sorted. The second son went back to the library, took down the atlas again and turned page after page after page until, aha, there it was, the Isle of Women. And he went back down to his ship and they set sail once more. And for 6 months they sailed across the globe until they came to the Isle of Women, and they were welcomed on the Isle of Women. Indeed, there were no men there, just women. And the queen of the Isle of Women, she consented to be the second son's bride. And back they sailed for another 6 months. And the youngest son? Well, of course, he went straight back into the forest, back to the white cat. And he spent his days talking to the white cat, and it never got old. He loved talking to her. And the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. And soon enough, nearly a whole year had gone, until one day, when he was looking out of the window, he saw a young girl walking through the forest. My quest! My quest! And he went running to the white cat and he said, "White cat, white cat, I had a year and a day to find myself the most beautiful woman in all the world to be my queen. And now that year is nearly past, and I know that there is no one that I want to be my bride but you." And the white cat, she smiled, and she said, "Well, take me with you then, and we shall see what we shall see." And so back into the carriage they got, and across the fields they went, out of the forest and across the fields, through the palace gates, through the city. And the people, when they saw the carriage pulled by cats, they laughed. When they saw the cat getting out of the carriage, they laughed. And the courtiers, as they went through the palace to the throne room, they laughed and laughed and laughed. And the youngest prince, he began to feel smaller and smaller and smaller. The white cat seemed serene beside him. When they came to the throne room, there was the king. And he was looking at his eldest son's bride, and he was looking at his second son's bride, looking this way, looking that way, and there wasn't a pin to choose between them. They were both very beautiful young women. When he saw his youngest son coming in with a cat, he didn't know what to think. "My son, what is this? I asked you to find the most beautiful woman in all the world, and you have come here with a cat. A very beautiful cat, of course, but a cat nonetheless. Explain yourself." And the young man, he stepped forward and he looked at the white cat and he smiled. And he said, "Father, I love her. I don't care if she's a cat. I don't care at all. She is the one I wish to marry. And I will marry her, whether you make me king or no." And at that, the white cat's fur began to shimmy and to shake. And she put her paws to her face and she pushed the cat face away until it fell down her shoulders and onto the floor, a cat's skin, revealing a most beautiful young woman. Perhaps the most beautiful young woman in the world, because her face was beaming with joy. And she looked at the youngest son and she said, "Thank you. You have freed me from the spell that was put upon me. I was cursed that I should never become a girl once more until someone loved me for who I was and not how I looked. And you have done it, and I shall be a woman forevermore." And the king, he looked at his eldest son's wife, and he looked at his middle son's wife, and he looked at his youngest son's wife. And he saw that they were all beautiful, and he couldn't choose between them. And besides, he still didn't want to stop being king. And so he didn't. And all the quests, were they for nothing? No. No. For the king, he had many wonderful dogs to keep him company. And each of the three sons had a wife that they loved. And in the end, it was actually the eldest son who became king. The son who had worked hard in the kingdom with his father, learning the ropes, doing good in the community, being a king. And he and his wife eventually took over. As for the second son, well, he still had his taste for adventure, and so did his wife. And so the two of them went back to the ship and they sailed away. And for all I know, they are sailing still. And as for the youngest son, he and his bride, no longer the white cat, they went back to the forest. And when they got there, they found that the house was no longer a cat's house. And all of the servants and the courtiers, they were no longer cats, they were humans again. The only cats that were there now, the little ones like we have in our houses, to be petted and pampered and fed and to maybe catch the occasional mouse or two. And all of them, well, they lived happily ever after. And that is the story of the white cat. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back tomorrow for more stories from Faerie and Fae World. And thank you very much again to Faerie and Fae World for having me this evening. It's been a real pleasure to tell you my story tonight. See you again soon. Bye.